Good morning. Good morning. I hope you guys are well today. For most of us, I know we're probably up and about. Today is a day that we ritualize and we celebrate Easter. And so a lot of people are probably, in a service somewhere or doing some family event, maybe looking for some Easter eggs, whatever the case. Good morning. I hope you guys are well. So we are going to delve into today's chapter. It is Sunday, rest day, uh, me care day, self care day, whatever you want to call it. Sunday is and can be, in many instances, a day for us to just gather ourselves for the upcoming week and commit to some type of personal um, healing process or personal wellness process, whatever that looks like, whatever you call it. Today is, a day that we choose to make sacred. Today is the day that I choose to read through our book that we've been reading, Spiritual Hygiene by Ayana Bonzant, one of my favorite all-time writers, novelist. She is a New York Times author. Her book was this book. She has a few books, but this one have been committed to healing. And through this process of recognizing what spiritual hygiene is and how it can help us and get us to a place where we want to be when it comes to enjoying life. And so that's why we're reading this book. It is a practical path for clean living, inner authority, and divine freedom. And so I'm all for it. I hope you guys are well. My name is Leticia, and the channel is Blood Moon Oracle. And we're going to jump right in. If you have purchased your book and have already read this particular chapter, it's chapter 5. It begins on page 87. Today we're going to start with prayer, which begins on 86. This opening prayer is entering into this particular chapter that we're about to read called Permission to Grieve. Permission to grieve. We've gone through this healing process where we've touched things like what it really means to heal and what type of things keep us from healing and how to recognize those things and work with those things. It's not about sweeping things under the rug. It's not about trying to act like they're not there, but it's a process of working through those things and understanding how we can do that and how to recognize it. Last week we talked about mirrors, and then we talked about the voice of trauma, how it splits into different survival cells. We talked about we talked about breaking through the smog, and so we touched on very important aspects of the healing process. And finally, we come to the last part of level 1, which she has termed healing. And we are talking about giving ourselves permission to grieve. Again, as I just stated, it's not about sweeping it under the rug or turning a blind eye and saying, oh, it'll go away, it'll heal itself, or our favorite, it will work itself out when it never does. It just gets bigger and bigger and passed down further and further, right? And so today we're going to talk about giving ourselves permission to breathe. And this is a sacred invitation into the final door of healing. And we're going to start with the opening prayer, or we can call this a meditation, however you choose to view it. This opening invitation is the river I refuse to cry. And it says, Divine Presence, Keeper of sorrow, sovereignty of stillness, I enter the sacred space with trembling hands and a guarded heart, yearning to be met in the places I have long avoided. Today I give myself permission to grieve, not as a weakness or as a failure. I grieve as sacred testimony to all I have carried, lost, and loved. I welcome the holy ache of healing and release. I make room for the tears I swallowed to survive. I open the vault where memory weeps and soul longs to breathe. buried, I allow all that has been silent to speak. I ask now for the courage to feel what I could not feel before, to mourn what happened, and to believe what never happened but should have. Hold me, Holy One, in the space between pain and peace. Let your presence be my refuge as I unclench fists of suppression. I declare that grief is not my enemy. It is my medicine, my midwife, my sacred river of relief, of release. Let the waters flow. Let the numbness fall. Let this be the beginning of my return to wholeness. Amen. Ashe, Aho, and so it is. Today I brought my glasses because sometimes I be needing that extra help. These really beautiful eyes. And so as we enter in, if you have your books, we're going in and starting on page 87. And we're going to begin to read all the way through 99. And then there's a reflection at the end. And there's also a a couple of resources that I will add if you choose to embark upon the resources. It will be up to you. And then there's closing of this gate of the level 1 healing before we enter into level 2 next week. So let's begin. Chapter 5, Permission to Breathe, a sacred invitation into the final door healing. It was 8:27 on a bright July Sunday morning when I got the call. Lisa is here. Laura's voice was soft, gentle, almost reflective. I knew that she I knew I knew that she knew that she was breaking my heart. I also knew she could deliver the message because she was spiritually clean. Still, hearing those words blew several circuits in my brain. The grounded spiritual teacher in me had known it was coming. I had prayed it would be later rather than sooner. 2 weeks to the day after the doctor insisted she do something about her toe, his prediction came true. The mother in me, the one who had resisted, denied, and used every tool in her mothering daddy tricks, fell to the floor, not weeping, not screaming, not breathing, just listening. Her son had found her. He had spent the night with her, falling asleep on her bed while she rested on the sofa. He asked her what she wanted for breakfast. She didn't answer. He called the police. Then my friend Laura. He did not call his mother. No. Laura knew that it was out of order, and she was clean enough to hold him with compassion rather than try to correct the misstep at the time. He left the apartment. The police were on their way. I assumed it was the spiritual teacher who had made 45-minute drive to meet his home. Laura met her outside the building, escorted her to the elevator, and walked her down the long, hot hallway. It was a heartbroken mother who opened the apartment door and saw her baby girl lying on the sofa with a carton of fruit punch in her hand. It was the mother who turned around and fainted in the hallway. When I came back to my senses, my first thought was, she must have been thirsty. Grief is the sacred gate of the soul when it is ready to release what it once held dear. Whether it was real or imagined, joyful or painful, fleeting or enduring, it is not always about death. It is about ending, transition, and the unspoken farewell that the mind cannot name but the heart deeply feels. Grief is holy. It is evidence of love and longing. It is the residue of attachment and expectation. It is the body's response to energetic rupture, the heart's mourning for what was, and the soul's yearning for what could not be. We often think of grief as something to endure, something to survive. However, spiritual hygiene invites us to see grief as something to be honored, to make space for, tend to with reverence. Grief is a healer, and when approached with awareness, with honesty, it does not break us, it baptizes. So this brings me to the moment where one of the most important people in my life transitioned to, move on to the next journey of the next phase of their journey, my grandmother. That was a hard one. I have never felt such grief and such peace, though, at the same time. It was about 6 months after she transitioned that I stopped smelling her and stopped hearing her, and I stopped feeling her tapping me on my shoulder or tapping me on my hip when I was laying down in my bed. That was hard. So as she's describing this process of accepting this thing that we call an ending or a transition of someone that we deeply care for is difficult. It took me about 3 years, maybe, to stop grieving that and to I was at peace. It was really strange because in a way I was at peace because we were all present. She ended up passing at home with her son, and so it was a very sacred passing. All of her grandchildren were there, and we were there in support of this transition. And it was very strange because I was the last one to make it. Everyone else was there. And it was almost as if she held on until everybody was present. And when everybody got there, whew, she peacefully transitioned over. And it was so beautiful and it was so sacred and it was so painful. It was all of those things mixed together, intermingled. And so when she describes this process, I understand. I understand. And that one was hard. That one knocked me off of my rocker. And I think that is really where I began to transition as well. We underestimate how these transitions, these endings, really do affect our lives. There's the before, and then there is the after. And when I say that, I mean there was the Leticia before she passed, and then there was the Leticia after she passed. Those were two totally different people. Partly because there was the experience of still having her with me after she passed in the spirit, and I could feel her. And it was a very tangible experience, a very tangible presence. It was like something broke open in me and in my experience. It was very strange. But the grief was heavy, and I'm not even gonna hold you. It was heavy, and so but to allow ourselves to grieve, and I did. I didn't hold back tears. I didn't hold back any of the processes that I needed to go through. I went through a lot of different phases, and I'm gonna really be honest. There was a phase where I didn't even want to be sober for a good year. Like I was just in a whole different space because I didn't know how to handle that. But I was kind of ushered back into the reality of what it was and accepting it and allowing myself to be okay, not being okay until I was okay. And so when we talk about that grieving process, she's going to talk about that here. It is difficult. And I am very appreciative of that because there is a lot of growth that took place during that time. Um, and so when she talks about this moment, it hits home. It really does. And the next part says, the grief we carry and the grief we wear. Misa was grieving long before she passed. Her body grieved the betrayal it could not speak. Her heart grieved the absence of safety. Even in the presence of love, her spirit grieved the freedom she could not imagine, and the version of herself she did not know how to become. She was grieving the mother she lost when Wanda could not fully be present. She was grieving the girl she had to abandon to survive. She was grieving the inheritance of silence, of fear and survival, of spiritual bypassing. that have been passed down through generations. Nisa did not know how to name her grief. Instead, it named her. It dressed itself as rebellion, resignation or refusal, as avoidance, anger, delay, and unforgiveness. These were the voices of her trauma that spoke louder than her truth. Her grief lived in the shadow of her lack of self awareness. It hid behind a voice of blame, whispers that someone else should have done more. It curled itself around the voice of shame, convincing her that something within her was broken. It danced with the voice of inheritance, replaying old patterns with new pain. It fueled the voice of survival, keeping her bound to the familiar rhythms of emotional isolation. In the absence of self honesty, the kind that says, I hurt, I'm afraid, I need help. Her grief became a closed door locked from the inside. I know this about my daughter because I learned this about myself. I can share these things about her with mindfulness, love, and compassion because no one shared them with me about me. My spiritual hygiene practice has given me the courage and clarity to share it myself out. This part says unswept loss, wisdom of unwept loss, and the wisdom of surrender. I never grieved for my mother. She died when I was 2. No one told me she had passed, not in a way a child could understand. And even if they had, how does a 2-year-old grieve? No one teaches a child how to hold sorrow in a world that barely acknowledges that they have a right to feel. Instead, I was told and raised to believe that my stepmother. I did not discover anything different until I was 30. I never grieved the loss of my child. It disappeared into the chaos of domestic violence, into the silence that followed physical and sexual abuse. I wore survival like a second skin, not realizing that the cost of survival was my soul's cost. It never grieved the collapse of my self-worth at 16 when my first love, father of my son, abandoned me after I told him I was pregnant. I told myself to be strong. I told myself I didn't need him. But what I didn't tell myself is that I had been shattered. I never grieved the loss of my dignity when my first husband, Jimmy's father, a Vietnam veteran convicted to drugs, was arrested for robbing a neighbor's home on the Army base at Fort Benning. That one act stole my shelter, my security, and the little bit of stability I had stitched together. I was evicted. My spousal allotment was cut, and I returned to Brooklyn, pregnant with a toddler in tow, no money, carrying not just a child, but the shame of being married to a convicted felon. I never grieved the loss of my self-respect when I chose to stay with a man who beat me before, after, and during my pregnancy with his child. The worst of the beatings came after someone whispered to him that the baby may not be his. My womb was full, and so was my sight. I didn't grieve my father's death either. He took his own life. Of all his 5 children, I was the only one left a note for. I didn't make space to mourn my daddy because I didn't know how. There was no time to grieve the losses of friends, of jobs, of hope. There was no ritual for the betrayal, no ceremony for the abandonments. I buried each performance, perseverance, and a sense of purpose for a time that seemed like. And I just want to stop right there. Sometimes we underestimate the need for grief. It's not just when somebody passes, but grief is something necessary through, I believe, every transition in life. Whenever a change takes place, sometimes it's necessary to grieve what has changed. When we move, grief sometimes is necessary when we no longer have the familiarity or the safety or the comfort of what used to be. But it's also necessary to grieve with things like disappointment, a loss of connection, or a change of a job, or when your path changes, right? Maybe you had a hope to one day do something that you've always dreamed of doing since you've been little, and it changes to something else. Sometimes it's necessary to grieve that lost hope, right? And so it's not just about when someone passes, grief is necessary. I feel like in many different stages of life that we overlook, and sometimes we don't make place or a sacred space for it because we don't know how. But that doesn't dismiss the necessity of it so that it does not turn into this weight. Y'all heard of that song, Bag Lady, Erica Badu? Yeah. Hurt your back, dragging all them back. I guess nobody ever told you all that you hold on to is you, is you, is you. That's what she talks about. Missed opportunities to breathe. And so we carry that pain, we bury it beneath performance, perseverance, achievement, and a sense of purpose. For a time, it seems like enough, but we'll discover that we need breathe. We need those sacred spaces. She says, the only time I came within splitting distance of truly needing grief was when my daughter Julia, her death pulled me under into a very dark place. Unfortunately, I was too numb to be scared. Grief put me in bed for 5 months. I forgot to honor it. I didn't remember to walk with it, so I wrestled with it. I tried to bargain. I tried to outrun it with sleep, prayer, and random spiritual practices. Even though spiritual hygiene had become the foundation of my life, my practice was no match for the tsunami of unprocessed grief that surged to the surface. Because grief does not forget, it waits. It waits for stillness. It waits for the cracking. It waits for your surrender. I knew I had come to a gunfight with a water pistol the day I sat with an actual pistol in my own hand, pointed to my head. That was the day I met the cost of deferred grief. That was the day I realized that even strength must bow, no matter who you are or how accomplished. Healing requires truth. That grief is not an enemy, it is an opening. Thank goodness, thank God that surrender is a sacred law of spiritual hygiene. Because when I did not know how to save myself, surrender did. And that's true. Listen, grief did not come to play. I remember having a moment, a couple of moments. First of all, I had twins. I was bedridden with my twins for a lot of the pregnancy because it was a high risk pregnancy. And my doctor put me on bed rest to avoid losing them. And so, and not only that, I couldn't hold down anymore. And so I was very weak. Every time I ate or drank, they would reject it. My body would reject it. And so it was a high risk pregnancy. And so I spent a lot of it in bed, sensitive to smell. And it was just a very not a pleasant experience. And shortly after, I also, after I gave birth to my twins, I was pregnant with my third child, not even a year later. And during this pregnancy, early on, before I even knew I was pregnant, I had a breakdown, a physical breakdown in my body. And to this day, I'm still, what I know what it is now, it was my body crying out relief or surrender, exactly what she's talking about here. And I remember just having these excruciating pains in my back that would come to the point where I couldn't even sit down. Like that's how bad it was. And it was my body crying out, letting me know, hey, you need to process. And when I think back on all of the things that, as far back as I could go, and I can remember that quite a ways, pretty close to birth, right? And just all of the things that compile because we don't know how to grieve, right? How do you teach a 2-year-old, like she said? You know, her father died. She was like two, I think she said, or it was either that or her mother. They told her about her mother's passing. She had some type of very heavy event that happened around two, but she was so young, like she couldn't even understand what that would be. At that point, this began to compile this theme of unprocessed grief, and it weighs heavy in the spiritual realm, in our spiritual bodies. And this is where that theme that we call the pain body begins to develop, right? And so, how do you know? How do you know that if you've never been taught that breathing is a sacred space, that it's okay to cry? Many of us have been taught to keep going, just grin and bear it. You got to keep going. You got to keep performing. You got to keep moving. Life goes on. But our bodies tell the truth, right? Our bodies will let us know, hey, this needs to be dealt with. There's something wrong. And life could be perfect. Life could be amazing. Everything could be happening the way that you have planned it and dreamed it out. And all of a sudden, bam, something happens. Well, that's a signal that something needs attention. Something happens in our bodies to tell us something different. That's a signal that something needs attention. And when I was pregnant with my third child, I had a breakdown in my body, literally. And I remember being at the doctor, and they could not tell me that there was anything wrong. There was nothing wrong. This was and I want to say, for purposes of my experience, I'm going to call it a spiritual attack. Because spiritual attacks doesn't always have to be like an attack from somebody that wants to harm you. A spiritual attack can also be something that happens as a result of what we're talking about here, right? And just like she just said, grief waits. It waits to be for the appropriate time to show up and show out and be heard. And it will be heard. Believe me when I tell you. And so what she's talking about here is true. It's true life. And sometimes when we have all of this built up, unresolved tension, where does it go? That's proof that energy is real. And I know for those of y'all that always hear me talking about energy, it's like, why is she always, what does that mean? Why is she always talking about energy? Energy this and energy, but energy is real. It's real. Nothing, energy doesn't die, right? It doesn't. It just maybe sometimes it changes into another form, but it keeps going and going. And with the energy that we send out comes back, right? The energy that we receive has to be used in some type of way. This energy around grief is the same. It's the same. It never dies. Sometimes it sits there and waits for an opportunity to show up. Sometimes that is in a way that is uncomfortable for our body and for our minds. However, it is a law that is exercised. It must be exercised. And that's what we're talking about here. That's exactly what we're talking about is how grief can affect us, unwept loss, and the wisdom of surrender if we don't surrender to it. And sometimes we don't know how. And so we meet life changing events like me when I was pregnant. That was a huge lesson for me because I could have lost my third child, but that was a huge wake up call for me. And nothing matures you like pain, let me tell you. And so this was a major moment, a transformational moment for me of taking care of myself. Part of that was releasing things that I have no control over and starting to focus on myself. At that moment, I began to really mature and see things differently and wake up from the slumber. And so grief has a purpose as well. And sometimes it is to wake us up. Sometimes it is to cause us to mature and to really see things for what they are. But we can't escape it. We cannot escape it, and we need to process it. That's what she's trying to get through to us here. The next section says the cost of unexpressed grief. What we out here, unacknowledged grief becomes toxic. It festers as resentment, disconnection, chronic fatigue, and emotional rigidity. It becomes spiritual congestion, a kind of soul smog that clogs the ability to feel joy, to guide love, to receive guidance. Lisa's unspoken, unmet. Lisa's grief, unspoken and unmet, became a silent war within her body. It was never the diabetes alone. It was the emotional exhaustion of carrying stories she could not complete and questions she could not ask. She needed permission, but no one had taught her how to grant it to herself. It was my intention to let this chapter do what was never done for her, which is to offer the sacred permission to grieve for her, for myself, for you, for every version of yourself that you have to become. Just keep going. And it's very important because sometimes this is something that we need to take responsibility for. And when I had that little episode, that breakdown in my body when I was pregnant with my third child, that's when I knew that there were some things that I needed to take responsibility for and not wait for anyone else to become responsible or mature, even though that should have been. It's my responsibility to care for this. And that's what Ayana is saying, offering ourselves the permission to grieve. This is why she's writing this book. This is why she's talking about these experiences that happened with her daughter. So we would know this is an example of how important this process is. And I know we go to different types of rituals and services and we say, this is where the healing is happening. But trust me when I say it, I did that. I did the almost 7 days a week. And I'm not shameful about that. I'm glad that I have the opportunity to raise my children in a very holistic environment. But at the end of the day, that grief that remained every day after I attended the service and did all of those ritualistic things, that grief that still remained was my responsibility as it is today. Sometimes we look for others and for other things to do what we are responsible to do. And that's why this book is so important. Spiritual hygiene is our responsibility. There are tools that are set up to assist us. They're not set up to do the work for us. And so we can't get that twisted. Somehow we're under the belief that there is no work to be done, that it has already been done. But the way was made for us to do the work. How is it that you could spend 12 years of your life in an environment that says that it produces healing and still walk away unhealed with unprocessed grief? It's because I was waiting for someone else to do the work that I needed to do. So I don't fault those 12 years. I'm actually thankful because without it, my life would not be as peaceful as it is now with my children and my family. Without it, there would not have been that foundation that they need to go out into the world and be good people and make good choices and, be able to operate out of a good place. And so I'm thankful for that. However, I also want them to know their responsibility to themselves and not to place that on anyone or anything else. That's what she's saying. That's what she's saying. That she has an obligation to let us know that you can address these things. You have a right to. There is an offering of sacred permission to grieve. You don't have to hold those tears back. You have a right to let them flow like a river. Grief and the four doors of healing. Grief is the final door in level one. This is what we've been talking about this whole time, level one. From healing all the way through these different topics until now, grief is the final door in level one because It requires all the others to be open. Without self-awareness, the front door, we do not even recognize what we've lost. Without self-honesty, the second, we cannot name the truth of our pain. Without energetic responsibility, the third door, we continue to carry the weight of what is not ours to carry. Without reckoning with trauma and its voices, the fourth door, we confuse grief with weakness. Grief is not weakness. Crying is not being a punk or being soft. It is a process that affords us healing and wholeness and happiness. We confuse it with weakness and numbness with strength, right? I have to be hard, right? I can't show weakness. We learn that somewhere in life. And that may be true in certain situations, but when it comes to you versus you, we have to be secure enough in ourselves to allow space for this. That don't mean you have to do it in front of everybody, right? But there is a process that you have to allow within yourself to be vulnerable, right? Numbness does not equate to strength, right? I don't know why I'm thinking of P40. I got a mirror in my pocket and I practice looking hard. Somebody might be watching that. There's a P40 fan. But to grieve well, we must first give ourselves permission. Permission to feel without fixing. Permission to cry without apology. Permission to be undone, unguarded, unmasked. Permission to not know how to work while knowing that we cannot go back. In that space, that sacred pause, where pain is no longer denied and the healing is not yet complete, we are met by the divine. We dwell there in the sacred presence, not to be repaired, but to be remembered. There's a thought that came up and it passed really quickly about allowing yourself to feel. And another thing that we deal with in society today is this not wanting to be soft, right? And we come to understand that everybody has feminine energy, everybody has masculine. For some reason, there's this thing about men not wanting to embrace their feminine energy because they feel like it makes them weak or soft or they're not supposed to be feminine. That could not be further from the truth. We're all given both feminine and masculine energy. We're duality, right? In existence. We have a feminine and a masculine side. We have higher self, we have a lower self, we have a light side, we have a dark side, right? There's a duality. We have a spiritual body, we have a physical body. There's a duality to our, that's why it's so beautiful. And to deny any part of that, to always stay in the light and never want to acknowledge or dwell in your darkness, which is very real, is toxic. Have you met someone who has never really acknowledge or doesn't acknowledge that they do wrong, right? That's what we're talking about, the darkness. Like, that's a toxic person. You don't feel like you make no mistakes, you've never done any wrong, and you've never sinned, or you've never crossed the boundaries of your own consciousness. You lie, right? You lie. I'm going to say it as plain as day because we all have a dark side. And so I say that to say, in terms of allowing ourselves to feel, especially as men. I'm not saying you have to do it in front of everybody if you don't feel comfortable, but to allow a sacred space to process that is necessary in order to be healthy. I think that's where that toxicity comes from. That word that we use far too much today, but that narcissistic tendency, right? That's where that comes from. It's in there somewhere, but it's necessary. In the same way, women, we have a masculine side. Me, for one, I'm very masculine because I've had to be. I raised my own kids by myself. So I had to be both, parts of that structure of the family, mostly the masculine structure, because that's the structure that makes things happen, that keeps things together, right? And so I have to operate heavily in that realm. And And so I'm very good at, you know, operating in that. I had to relearn how to operate in my feminine. And I love it. I love it here. But that's something that's necessary. And the world teaches us that there is weakness for a man to acknowledge his femininity and to acknowledge the soft side. That's what's necessary for you. It's necessary for you to be vulnerable and open and give yourself permission to be undone, unguarded, unmasked. And to be masculine means to be directive and to have a plan and to be structured and to make things happen. Well, what happens when you don't have that? You have to give yourself permission to move forward while not knowing where you're going sometimes, but just knowing that you can't go back because that back there didn't work. That's a feminine principle of creativity. It's creating as you're moving forward. You are creating as you're moving. That's a feminine principle. And so these hit many different ways. It's just my mind is just overflowing with just ways that this could come to life for us. But we have to remember and allow ourselves that space that is so important. This is a sacred presence that we are entitled to. Everybody, men and women alike, grief is necessary. And so she just talked about the four doors of healing, how each one is important. The first one being self awareness, the second one being self honesty, the third one being energetic responsibility, the fourth one being reckoning with the trauma and its voices. And then we come to grief, giving ourselves permission without apology, right? Yes. And then we go into the next session, the power of spiritual cleanliness amid chaos. Did you know that you can be peaceful in the middle of a storm? Right? That'll preach right there. By the time the police arrived, Lisa's youngest son had already erupted twice. The first eruption came when he turned on my son, his uncle, with fists clenched in rage and a mouth spilling every wound his mother had sewn into him. The second came when he lashed out at Laura, his godmother, the one person who remained steady in compassion. One moment he was screaming wildly in the street, the next he was confronting everyone, including me, carrying the weight of inherited anger, unresolved stories, and the painful narrative Lisa had passed down to him like heirlooms wrapped in grief. Her death had been anticipated by doctors. Because of this, the attending physician authorized her body to bypass the hospital ward and go directly to the funeral. Both my grandson and I called different ones. The one he called arrived first. I asked the funeral director a simple question, which ignited yet another storm. He erupted again. Accusations, expletives, condemnation. What I had done, what I hadn't done, what he would never ask me for, how he would bury his mother on his own. His voice carried the fury of every unhealed, the agony of every childhood disappointment, the fire of a protector who was too young to carry so much pain. His aggression was so intense that the funeral director got in the hearse, backed away, and left. When the funeral director I had called arrived, the air changed. He snapped again. This time he snatched his mother's purse and her Bible, both of which I had gently set aside to keep as sacred relics. He paced, he cursed, he became grief embodied and ravenous, a rabid soul lashing out at each step. He refused to allow the funeral director into the apartment. He identified me as the adversary, telling them that they could come in, but I could not. I was a ruckus in the hallway that prompted the neighbors to call the police, for it was a ruckus in the hallway that prompted the neighbors to call the police. When they arrived, he slammed the apartment door in their faces, telling them the same thing. He had not broken any laws. His name was on the lease. They could come in to get his mother's body, but I could not enter. After several moments of back and forth, I walked to the door and prayed silently. Everyone and everything fell silent and still. My grandson opened the door, perhaps believing that we had left. When he looked out, my face was the first one he saw. Our eyes locked. Without raising my voice above normal speaking tone, I said, "Beloved, I know that is your, but that is my daughter. In the same way she would stand for you, I am standing for her. I need you to get out of the way so that we can." He opened the door. As they wheeled the gurney with her body down the hall of the shield of goodness, I walked behind them reciting the 23rd Psalm. Yea, though I walk, I shall fear no evil. When the hearse pulled away, we had all gathered again in front of the apartment building. The neighbors had heard the news. Some of them came down to offer condolences to me. My grandson was raging again. People were staring. Cars were slowing down as they passed by. I cannot recall now what we were discussing then, but I do remember my grandson threatening correction. He said something that could be construed as, "My son, my beautiful, you don't disrespect." Son stepped in. He begged me to leave. I told him I would not leave until he left, not out of defiance, but out of honor, out of a mother's commitment to bear witness to every moment of her child's earthly chapter. In my mind, this would not be a story of an uncle, my son, pummeling his nephew, my grandson, into concrete pavement. We all lived together. Me, the grieving mother, me, the spiritual teacher, my son, Auntie Godmother Laura, and 4 members of my staff who had quietly shown up as soon as they heard the news. He walked away as one, but I carried many. We walked away as one, excuse me, but I carried many within me. The next few hours vanished into stillness. I made calls. I told the people I needed to tell. I spoke to the people I knew would have their hair on fire if they could not reach me. I spoke with an eerie calmness that made others uneasy. "You okay? Do you need anything? What can I do?" They asked these questions as if they didn't hear it in my voice already. I was shocked. I was clean, not numb, not hurt, not in denial. I was processing internally and spiritually. I was honoring every thought. I was listening to every feeling. I was questioning nothing and acknowledging everything. I was devastated. I was heartbroken. And I was mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Grief in its most primal expression is not pleasant or poetic. Sometimes it's rage. Sometimes it's silence. Sometimes it is the quiet dignity of holding your center in the face of another's. Spiritual cleanliness is not the absence of emotion. It is the refusal to let emotion root your truth. On that day, I did not react. I responded from soul, from surrender, from love. I responded from strength I had excavated years of inner work and from the experience of burying Jahid. It was a strange thought. When it landed, I was startled. I know how to do this. I have done it before. Act like you know this will not unalive you. In that moment, I learned something no book, no sermon, no sacred text could have taught me. When you are spiritually clean, you are solid within yourself. Your cleanliness renders you clear enough to stand in the fire of someone else's unprocessed grief, or anger, or shame, and still remember who you are. With that being said, this explains something that happens very often when we lose someone and they pass over. All of these things come up, all of these unforgiven trespasses, all of the shame, the fear, the grief, the pain. That's why there's usually some big eruption. Someone passes. It always happens. It never fails. Because at this moment, the pain body is very active. Our unawareness and our unconsciousness is at an all-time high. Sometimes we don't even know what we're doing. We're just acting out of our grief that was never given a sacred place or a sacred space to heal. That's why when a loved one passes, there's these family, rivals that happen. And many times, if we're not careful, what she just described was her ability to be at peace within this. Many times, if we're not careful, we will allow other people's pain lines to draw us in if we're not careful. However, her being someone who has obviously gone through this before and someone who has studied this and studied herself, she says she was able to maintain her integrity through this process. I don't know if I would have been able to do it. That's difficult, but she did it. A lot of times, this is where things get real ugly, you know, especially when there's other things involved. Who got left this? Who got left that? What happened? You were never there, and I was always here. It turns into complete chaos sometimes, just like it was demonstrated here. And a lot of it is unconscious because we are not aware of unprocessed grief that have not had a chance to be. And so this is real. It's real. Um, every time I can mark every passing in my family how there have been some falling out about something. Sometimes it's about money. Many times it's about money. But sometimes it's about the fact that we didn't get to make it right. There are many things, and that could be about feeling guilty about something. But there's many things, and to be aware and to give ourselves permission to breathe is what we're talking about. Yeah. I'm going to read the last part of this text. She said, when you are spiritually clean, you are solid within yourself. Your cleanliness renders you clear enough to stand in the fire of someone else's unprocessed grief or anger or shame and still remember. It becomes easy, especially in those high, energetic moments where, the pain is running high and, emotions are off the scales. It's easy to get pulled into that. That could have went a whole different way had she been pulled into that energy and mirrored that energy, but she chose not to. The next part says grief as a sacred threshold. Grief is not an obstacle to healing. It is the healing. To cleanse mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, you must let the river of grief flow through you. You cannot control it. You must learn how to welcome it, to bless it, to be open to it. It is a movement of emotion that breaks open the hardened shell around the heart. It is the softening of the inner soil where new seeds of truth can be planted. A spiritually responsible and mature soul does not free. She learns or he learns how to sit with it, breathe through it, to see it and speak to it as a friend, not an enemy. Perhaps most courageously, with a deep desire to be healed, she learns to listen to grief and ask it what it has come to reveal. Amid the shocking pain that a loss can cause, it is important to remember that grief is not only about what has been lost, it is primarily about what has been. What if grief is the sacred sign that our hearts were open when we thought we were battered and closed? What if only grief can remind us that our hopes are still alive? What if grief has the power to challenge us to dare us to believe in something more than we have ever known. That part. What if? Maybe, maybe not. Could be. Who knows? The cost of unexpressed grief. Let's talk about it. She says, I did not attend my daughter's funeral. I had come to understand that my grandson's bravado was a grief driven performance. Loud, sharp, unpredictable. I paid for her services, yes. I made sure someone asked him what he wanted, and I ensured it was provided. But in the depths of my soul, just beneath my devastated heart, I knew that I would not be emotionally safe in his presence. I could not trust that my being there, despite my financial support, despite my silence, would not set him off. I would not give him the opportunity to dishonor his mother by dishonoring her mother. Holding those thoughts without judgment or anger, I created my own. I went to the funeral home the day before her service. Her grand her godmother and a few other close friends were also there. We sat with her. I prayed for her. I anointed her with the tears that I had not shed with her for her during her short birth life. I asked for her forgiveness. I offered her mine. I asked the funeral director to polish her nails carefully. It was her favorite color. I made her a three-strand necklace of amethyst and mother of pearl. Amethyst, stone of transformation, supports movement from one state into another. Mother of pearl promotes tranquility. It is believed to cleanse and purify the aura. It is associated with the divine feminine, nurturing the soul, calming the spirit, and fostering inner peace. I wanted that. The spiritual hygiene I have given it to. I do not believe death is the end. I believe it is a doorway, a return, not just to your source and creator, but also a return to the truth. The physical realm, what we can see, hear, and touch, is third dimensional reality. The spiritual realm, what we can sense, feel, and what we know, even when there is no physical evidence, is fifth dimensional reality. Imagine on a bright afternoon, you are running across a field holding a string of a kite. The wind lifts the kite high, painting a colorful arc against the sky. Soon the kite disappears into the clouds. Your eyes, your eyes, it is gone. Yet the gentle tug and pull of the string in your hand is proof enough that the kite is still there, even if it cannot be seen. This is the difference between the third dimension and the fifth dimension of reality. The third dimension is the visible kite, what you can see, touch, and measure with your senses. The fifth dimension is the invisible pull of the string, what you can feel, know, and trust beyond physical evidence. I believe that death is a crossing from form to formlessness, from 3D to 5D and beyond. I believe that we are ushered into a formless state as an opportunity to shake off the shackles of the ego-driven personality, the spiritual smog of the 3D world, so that we can start all over again. And so I adore Lisa in a language that soul understands: beauty, intention, reverence. I gave to her soul what I did not know how to give to her mind and heart when she was subjected to the poor spiritual hygiene that Rama infected her with. I gave her what she could not or refused to accept from Ayana. Her funeral was a ceremony for the people who knew her. My time with her was a ritual for the parts of me that still longed to know her and to be known by her. In the stillness of that room, on the lower level of a funeral home surrounded by silence and sacred stone, my daughter Lisa Camille and I began to heal. Spiritual hygiene for the heart is the next part. Page 96. Grief is the natural, sacred, and often unspoken response to loss, any loss. It is not only reserved for death. At its core, grief is love searching for a place to go. It is the ache of the soul recognizing that something it once held, expected, or identified with is no longer there. It may arise from the death of a loved one, the loss of a dream, a betrayal, a transition, a broken identity, or a generational pattern being released. Grief is not a problem to be solved. It is a process of integration. It is the soul recalibrating itself in the presence of infinite. Grief requires presence, and presence requires surrender. Most of us have been taught that strength is silent, that pain must be hidden, that survival matters more than softness. And we avoid grief because we fear being overwhelmed by it. We carry inherited beliefs that emotion is weakness, and we don't know how to hold space for pain without trying to fix it. No one modeled grief as a sacred act. It is commonly considered a private, sometimes shameful breakdown. Perhaps in service to spiritual hygiene, we now acknowledge that we resist grief because it demands truth. To grieve fully, authentically, we must admit what mattered and what did not. We must be willing to say, that hurt me. This shaped me. This ended something in me. However, when we are talking about a departed loved one, the ego tells us that's not right. The level of honesty the grief requires may terrify the ego, but it liberates the soul. Perhaps in service to spiritual hygiene, we can now tell a deeper truth. We resist grief not because we are weak, but because grief demands honesty, especially emotional honesty, dismantles the ego's illusion of control. To grieve fully is to surrender our curated narrative. It means admitting what matters deeply. It requires confessing what we lost, what we loved, and what we never received. It dares us to speak words we choke back. That shattered me. That shattered me. That changed me forever. That was not fair. That hurt me. Grief is not just a feeling, it is also a revelation. It reveals what the soul holds sacred and what the ego tried to bury beneath performance, pride, and politeness. When the grief is about a departed loved one, the ego often resists even more. The voice of the ego says, don't say that. Be grateful, be strong. But thank goodness that grief is not concerned about nice. It is concerned with wholeness. To be whole, we must tell the truth about our experience, not just the memory. Grief demands that we put down the mask and pick up the mirror. It invites us into the holy ache of what is real. While this breadth, depth, and level of honesty terrifies the ego, it liberates the soul. What we grieve, we honor. What we release, we no longer carry. What we cleanse, we reclaim. This is the sacred labor of spiritual life. To clean the heart of suppression, to rinse the soul of destruction, to allow grief to become a fresh, not a trap. Let it be said, to grieve is to grow. To grieve is to return to truth, and truth is always the beginning of movement. The next part says the distinction of grief and the difference between the two. Grieving is the internal experience of loss. It is what happens inside the heart, mind, and spirit. Grief is personal, invisible, and often wordless. It lingers in the breath, in the bones, in the quiet places no one sees. Mourning is the external expression of that grief. It is how we honor and make visible what we feel inwardly. We express mourning through rituals, tears, storytelling, art, silence, ceremony, and remembrance. Think of it this way. Grief is the seed. Mourning is what blooms. To grieve and not mourn is to carry sorrow, sacred sorrow, without release. To mourn without grieving is to perform pain without ever touching its root. Both are needed. Both facilitate healing. Unfortunately, many people get stuck in mourning. It happens when we carry remorse. It occurs when the voice of guilt or shame convinces us that something we did or didn't do should have been done differently. Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross introduced the most common top model for understanding the stages of grief. She identified denial, anger, bargaining, repression, and acceptance. While these stages do not unfold in a linear way, we can see that at each stage there is the potential for trauma to be triggered and a voice to be raised. When that happens, we bypass the root of grief and sit on the branches of the trauma that leads. That branch is called mourning. That branch focuses outward. That branch will hold us until we reach for a root of spiritual hygiene that lowers us gently back into the truth of the pain. Grief is a cleanser. It purifies the emotional field. It softens mental rigidity. It dissolves spiritual numbness. Grief unclogs the energetic arteries of the soul. It removes the spiritual residue left by denial, avoidance, and suppression. To fully grieve, you must be willing to do these things. Practice self-honesty. This mattered to me. Cultivate self-awareness. This impacted me because. Take energetic responsibility. I choose to feel this rather than hide from it, and engage in emotional hygiene. I release the toxins of unexpressed sorrow. Grief, when felt consciously, is one of the purest forms of surrender. It does not ask for permission to enter, it arrives as it pleases, when the force of a flood or the slow echo of a whisper. Yet when it is welcomed, when it is witnessed with love, grief becomes an initiator. It humbles the ego, opens the heart, and reorients the soul to what is truly sacred, authentic, and enduring. In the practice of spiritual hygiene, grief is not seen as a detour or interruption of life. It is not a problem to be fixed or a weakness to be concealed. It is a rite of passage, holy, necessary, and deeply transformative. Grief carries us across thresholds of identity, of understanding, and of love itself. Where there is grief, there has been love and connection. Grief is a recognition that something once held dearly has shifted, ended, or has been taken. That shifting is sacred. In that shifting, the soul cries out in reverence that it's saddled with pain. Grief reminds us of sacred moments we cannot relive. It honors what has shaped us and sometimes what has broken us. It echoes the illusion that anything or anyone is truly ours to keep. It is that breaking that brings us to our knees and softens us. It is the shards of that breaking that calls us inward. Grief is the cleansing fire, a purifying rain. It can move stagnant energy, clear the residue of attachment, and make room for new becoming. Grief, like nothing else, strips us of performance and pretension. It reveals the honest contours of the soul. The ego resists this kind of nakedness because it wants control, certainty, and appearance. But grief says, come as you are, lay it all down, tell the truth about what matters, and you will be healed. This is spiritual hygiene of the highest order. In grief, you are not just washing the outer surface of your life, you are also scrubbing the inner altar of your heart. You are not just releasing a personal, you are not just releasing a person or something that mattered. You are releasing judgments, expectations, regrets, illusions, and the stories that were never fully lived. Grief invites you into the deep waters of remembrance, where what has been lost becomes a teacher, and what has been loved becomes a bridge into your deeper self. If you stay present to it, when the grief has run its course, when it has taught what it came to teach, you will not be who you were. You will be softer, surrendered, more spacious in your thinking, feeling, and being. You will walk lighter because you have shed. You will love more deeply because you are unafraid. You will have made room for all things you thought would never come. Now, maybe they can. sacred space. This is a grief reflection page to feel, remember, and release. And so I'm going to post an activity here, and I'll put it down in the actual description as a resource. If you want to follow up and you don't have a book to reference, you can definitely click on the resource and reference it here. Her invitation into this process is called the Grief Reflection Page, a sacred space to feel, remember, and release. As you go into that, she just says, beloved one, as you arrive at this reflection page, you know that you are not broken because you grieve. I'll say that again. You are not broken because you grieve. You are not weak because you feel deeply. You are not weak because you feel deeply. You are human, more than human. You are a soul. Grief is not simply about what has been lost. It is about what has lived inside you, what shaped you, what mattered so deeply it left an imprint. Grief is the soul's sacred way of remembering love, processing change, and making room for your next becoming. This page is not here to fix you or force closure. It is here to hold space for your honesty. Here you are invited to lay down the mask, the strength, the silence, the stories you carry. You are invited to speak from the ache. You are invited to honor with your heart. Let your pen become your witness here. Let your tears be your medicine. Let this reflection be a spiritual bath that clears not just your pain, but opens the heart and gives you permission to fully live again. So take a breath, place your hand on your heart, and say to yourself, I am free to breathe. I am ready to feel. I am willing to heal. And so, with love, it is. So if you like, go ahead and click on the resource below and, look through it and take advantage of that resource. Okay. This is such an appropriate reading, even of today being Easter. We're talking about that. What happened during the Easter event for those that are engaged with this sacred ritual today of Easter. This ritual is all about grief and release and surrender. How appropriate is that this would land on Easter Sunday? Because that's what we're talking about, that process. And so, and even if you don't participate in Easter rituals, it's still appropriate for today. It's appropriate for any day. I just found it interesting that this would land on this day and it correlates with the Easter story. But this is so amazing and it's so powerful. I hope you are enjoying this as much as I am. I am going to put that resource down below. Okay. And then there is a closing to level one that we're going to take a look at here as well. Closing of the gate of level one. There comes a time on the healing path when silence no longer means safety. There comes a time on the healing path when silence no longer means safety, when hiding no longer feels like home, when the ache within can no longer be outrun by performance, denial, or survival. This is a sacred threshold of spiritual hygiene. In this first gate, level one, healing, you have entered the terrain of your inner world, not to judge it, but to clean it. Whether the stories and offerings you have encountered stirred something within you, or if you simply took them as something to consider, the cleansing has begun. You may not even realize it. The energetic intention of this work is such that your presence is enough. You have stood at the mirror of your mind, your heart, your habits, and your history. You have remembered what it feels like to truly see yourself. You have been awakened to the gift of self awareness, the light that reveals what has been hidden. You have been exposed to the practice of self honesty, the sacred art of telling yourself the truth, especially when it's hard, especially when it hurts. You have seen how to confront the patterns of emotional dishonesty, the mask, the suppression, the pretending not to feel. And then you did what many never find the courage to do. You accepted your energetic responsibility by turning the page and continuing to read, or by clicking on in the next video and continuing to listen. You look not just at what happened to you, but how your energy responded. In doing so, you began the process of reclaiming your inner authority, not by blaming others, by choosing how you will carry the story, the sorrow, and the sacredness of the journey. Whether it happened consciously or unconsciously, the process has begun. You have the right to choose whether you will continue the process or not. You met the voices of trauma, those inner protectors disguised as saboteurs, the voice of performance, the voice of shame, the voice of delay, the voices of avoidance, inheritance, blame, anger, and fear. You learn that they are not evil. They are echoes of a soul trying to stay alive in a world that asks it to be quiet. Ooh. They are the residue of what your strength and your courage have already taught you. You name the price of pretending. You examine the residue of unforgiveness towards others and most tenderly towards yourself. You acknowledge that what you did to survive came at a cost, and you chose to forgive yourself for the toll it took on your soul. At last, perhaps for the first time in your life, you gave yourself permission to breathe, cry, to remember, to break open without falling apart, to let go of the idea that being strong means silence, to feel the sacred truth that grief is not the end, it is the beginning of healing. You are not who you were when you began this path. You may not yet be who you are becoming, but you are cleaner, clearer, softer in the right place, stronger in the right way. You have returned to yourself, not as a performance, but as a presence. This is your sacred return to the throne of your mind, to the altar of your heart, to the center of your soul. And I salute you. I honor you. I thank my beautiful baby girl Nisa for guiding me and us through this phase of the journey. May you carry these teachings as lessons, not burdens, not as rules, but as revelation, not as pressure, but as presence. You are worthy of healing, and you are trustworthy with your truth. You are whole, even in your becoming. You are clean. Level one is complete. When you feel ready, let the sacred work continue. And it is so. And so it is. Amen. Ashe, I hope that was level one. We will continue next week, same time, same place. I am just speechless uh, and so thankful for the change that is being afforded to me within my personal experience. It has been so amazing. Can't make it up. As I look over my life, and I've become so grateful and so thankful. And I realize I'm often reminded there is always someone, as bad as you think you have it, there's always someone that would love to be in your shoes. comparison does not do us justice, because here you are looking at somebody else and you're wanting what they have, and someone's looking at you wanting what you have. How about just being thankful for what you have, being grateful, appreciating that, and understanding the sacredness of that great that ability to be thankful and aware of what you have. As I look back over my life, you could not tell me that I would be doing what I'm doing right now, that I would know what I know right now, but I'm grateful for it and I don't take it for granted. And I understand my sacred responsibility around it, which is why I take it seriously. That doesn't mean that life has to be like super serious and no fun. No, it's a balance. Wholeness includes all of that. It's being present for it all and also allowing myself to work through the difficult places. And so I'm just so thankful. Every day is a transformation for me. Every single day. Even the hard parts, they have become rituals of revelation of what yet needs to be healed sometimes, what yet needs to be faced and dealt with. Like, to be present is like one of the greatest gifts. Be present and aware, right? And so I'm just so thankful. And if you're enjoying this, hopefully you get it and you're able to see the value that you've been afforded as well. It may not look like my life and my experiences, but you have your own that you can reflect on and continue to work through. And so I'm just so grateful. I'm overpouring. If I was a cup, it would be overpouring, right? With emotion and gratefulness and thankfulness of joy just to be here, you know? And so that's our reading for today. I appreciate every last one of you that stopped by, that show support in whatever way you show it, right? There are those that are like, yeah, whatever. I don't like it. Thank you. Thank you. I thank you too. Because it draws some kind of reaction. Whether you know it or not, the process has begun and it's your journey. I'm just here to open it up, to deliver the message, to help deliver it. Yahweh has delivered it. I'm here to help her deliver it. But if you have not picked up the book, we're going to start on level 2. All right, we've completed level 1. It's about $20 to $30. You can pick it up at Barnes and Nobles. You can actually order it. You might find it cheaper online. I don't know. About $20 to $30. It's not a lot. That's a few. That's a meal at a nice restaurant, right? But what is that compared to the feeding of your soul? Like, nothing can compare to that. And that's exactly what this is. It's so good. And it's valuable. And I'm thankful for those that take the call. We're surrounded by people. I've had many different encounters with people who have chosen to walk, in their calling. And not all of them are aligned with our idea of what we believe their calling should be. Like, some people have been called to be pastors. Some people have been called to be um, ministers of sometimes the gospel, sometimes it's ministers of some form of spirituality, healing. When we talk about spirituality, like, there are those that heal through things like Reiki, the passing of energy, right? Um, Healing through teaching principles, right? And this is proof of the call. The fact that it has changed so many lives and is changing lives through truth. And so, whatever your calling is, pick up your calling, whatever that is, or be open to receive. As people are made available, resources are made available through these different ways. I've had the opportunity to experience like so many different truths when it comes to healing over this last maybe 3, 4+ years. It has truly been like astounding and amazing. And I'm excited. I'm excited because I ran across a quote this morning from Bruce Lee. I love Bruce Lee. I grew up off of Bruce Lee. But there's a quote for some reason that came across my page this morning talking about living life and continuing to move, not allowing ourselves to be limited. Bruce Lee says that limitations are an illusion. There are no levels or limits in life, only plateaus that we place on ourselves, right? It's an illusion. And then he says, accepting a plateau. That means that this is as far as I can go. I can't go past this. Accepting that, whether physical or mental, means stagnation. He says to urge instead for constant, relentless growth and self-surpassing. So we're not competing, right? This is about you versus you. This is about you releasing yourself from your own limits and continuing to grow, continuing to live your best life, continuing to allow yourself to experience things that you never in a million years thought that you could experience. Yeah, that's what this is about. Within the guise of, for this particular topic, spiritual hygiene. Okay. So, like, share, comment, subscribe. Thank you for stopping by and listening. See you all next week. Again, my name is Leticia. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I hope you are enjoying this as much as I am. If you have not hit the bell so that you will know the next time the video is posted for the next chapter, there is a playlist where you can go and find all of the previous videos that we have been posting from the beginning of the starting of this book. You are more than welcome to go over and take a listen. They are all free. Okay. You're also welcome to go and purchase the book and follow along. Anyhow, I will see you all next week. Take care. Enjoy your ritual, whatever you embark upon for Easter Sunday. Today is the day where we do that. And so enjoy this particular celebration cause today. All right. We'll see you all next week. Let me work here.